On the streets of Seoul late at night, the water delivery worker anxiously knocked on the shop door. To save trouble, he parked his vehicle at the alley entrance. That area was likely a no-parking zone. According to regulations, parking for more than 5 minutes would result in a fine. However, there are usually no traffic police patrolling late at night. But the situation for this water delivery worker was somewhat special. If you asked him who the most terrifying person in the world was, in his mind, it was neither a desperate villain nor a cold-hearted person. Instead, it was a busybody like Gyo-ol, who seemed to do nothing but always loved to meddle in others' affairs. Last week, he accidentally hit Gyo-ol's nephew with his car. Since then, the lady had been constantly coming to his door to urge him to fix his vehicle's horn quickly. Gyo-ol even took her nephew and niece out at night to collect evidence of his illegal parking. Now, the water delivery worker had received 11 fines. If Gyo-ol submitted new evidence to the platform, his driver's license could be revoked. Helpless, he could only lower his head and agree to go to the repair shop the next day to deal with the vehicle issue. Satisfied with his promise, Gyo-ol, who had been waiting for a week, finally left contentedly. For Gyo-ol, she could forego the accident compensation. But for public safety, no matter how busy the water delivery worker was, he had to fix the vehicle's horn. She was busy with her 2 children until late at night, and only felt relieved to prepare to go home after achieving her goal. As the 3 of them reached downstairs, they ran into Do-won, who had just finished work at the law firm. Do-won was Gyo-ol's younger brother and worked as a lawyer, making him very busy. For many years, he had entrusted his sister to help take care of the children and handle household chores. As they entered the elevator, Do-won, holding his son, asked where he had been today. He knew his son had been following his aunt all week, taking photos of illegal parking on the street. However, when he heard that his son would follow Gyo-ol to the repair shop again the next day, Do-won decided to have a serious talk with his sister. He couldn't let the child participate in such meddling activities every day. Meanwhile, Gyo-ol, carrying her niece Min Jae-ong, slowly climbed the stairs with tired steps. She felt a vague sense of unease. Being caught by Do-won so late bringing the children back would likely lead to a lecture. Sure enough, as soon as they entered the house, Do-won demanded that Gyo-ol move out as soon as possible. He had long disapproved of his sister's way of doing things, believing she was always stirring up trouble. If one day she encountered a difficult person, it could endanger the children. More importantly, he did not want his son to learn such a calculating personality. Gyo-ol did not argue with him, but directly asked Do-won to settle the household and childcare expenses from the past 5 years. She quickly calculated on her calculator and finally quoted a price of 170 million won. Do-won could no longer tolerate it and directly threw a bank card with 200 million won at her, demanding she pack her bags and leave overnight. However, watching her sister's departing figure, Do-won couldn't help but sigh deeply. He really couldn't understand why his sister was unwilling to choose a stable and peaceful life like ordinary people. After leaving Do-won's house, Gyo-ol went to find another brother, Seon, who was a police officer, hoping to stay temporarily. Unfortunately, Seon's jurisdiction had recently seen a surge in cases, and before he could settle his sister in, he was urgently called back to duty. With nowhere to go, Gyo-ol finally settled on an apartment in Sinjin-dong. That place was remote, with very few residents, so the rent was relatively cheap. The security guard at the apartment was incredulous to see a new tenant moving in. He couldn't understand why anyone would want to rent a place here. Thinking Gyo-ol's decision was not wise at all. Gyo-ol didn't take the guard's advice to heart, initially believing that the apartment's issues were just elevator malfunctions. However, on the night of her move-in, a deafening noise roared like thunder, causing her ears to hurt. Seeing no sign of the noise stopping, Gyo-ol couldn't take it anymore and rushed upstairs to knock on the door to intervene. But no matter how hard she knocked, no one inside responded. Even more bizarre, as soon as the knocking stopped, the noise suddenly disappeared. Shaken, Gyo-ol turned to leave, but bumped into a disheveled woman at the stairwell corner. The woman had a vacant expression, tightly gripping a knife, murmuring about killing everyone and going to hell. Gyo-ol immediately felt a chill run down her spine and stumbled down the stairs, waking the guard and demanding that he call the police immediately. The guard, however, looked unconvinced and showed an unhappy expression. It turned out that for nearly half a year, this building had been producing huge and regular noises every midnight. No one could find the source, and calling the police was useless. So many residents had gradually moved out. Now, the remaining residents were mostly those who couldn't afford to leave, but they were also nearly driven to the brink of collapse. For instance, the woman Gyo-ol had just encountered was originally a well-respected resident representative here. However, due to long-term sleep deprivation, She had become mentally weakened, often sleepwalking with a knife at night. If it were an ordinary person, knowing how terrible the living conditions were here, they would have surely moved out at the first opportunity. But Jeol was different. In her brother's eyes, she had always been synonymous with meddling in others' affairs. She thought to herself that she could just walk away, but wouldn't the remaining residents still suffer from the noise every night? So, she was determined to find out the source of the noise and resolve the issue completely. The next morning, Jeol called her police officer brother Seon, Jiwon, and the security guard to investigate upstairs together. They found that the unit above was completely empty. The guard complained in dissatisfaction that this was a waste of effort. In his view, this building should have been demolished long ago. Jeol ignored his words, thinking he was just afraid of trouble. As for why the police have been unable to pinpoint the source of the sound, Seon explained that it is because the sound can be transmitted through the building's steel reinforcement, creating a resonance effect that makes it difficult to locate. Moreover, every time they arrive at the scene, the noise immediately stops, so they have never been able to catch the perpetrator. Hearing this, Jeol felt invigorated. The more she thought about it, the stranger it seemed. This was definitely not a simple prank, but rather someone deliberately creating noise to drive the residents away, hiding an ulterior motive. Subsequently, Jeol learned that the apartment was under demolition planning, and the Residents Committee and the Reconstruction Association were arguing incessantly about it. As Ji-won, she firmly opposed the demolition. At this point, everything seemed to have a reasonable explanation. People from the Reconstruction Association had infiltrated the apartment, creating noise every day to force the residents to move out, so that the entire building could be demolished smoothly. With a general direction for her investigation in mind, Jeol returned home with a lighter step. However, when she looked up, she was startled into a cold sweat by the sight on the rooftop of the apartment building. There was a figure standing at the edge. She quickly had Ji-won call the police while she rushed upstairs, and after a difficult persuasion, she finally pulled the man who wanted to commit suicide back to safety. The man was named Jaeyoung-suk, 36 years old. It was said that a wizard had predicted he would be heavily in debt and live like a walking corpse, so he felt that living was meaningless and preferred to end it early. Jeol thought this reason was quite frivolous, but she couldn't find a flaw in it at the moment. Ji-won then stepped forward to explain that the wizard lived on the third floor of the apartment, and thanks to the talismans he distributed, everyone was barely holding on until now. Hearing this, Jeol's heart sank. Could it be that the wizard was deliberately creating noise to sell talismans? After all, in a situation where everyone was suffering, he was the only one making money. But when she confronted the wizard, he called it absurd, because if he drove all the residents away, he would lose his clientele, which would be equivalent to cutting off his own source of income. However, if it wasn't the wizard, then who was it? Just as Jeol was puzzled, she received a call from her brother Do-won. On the line, she heard her brother's almost frantic questioning, and only then did she realize that her niece and nephew had secretly gone to the repair center to supervise the water delivery worker fixing a car without telling her. But Do-won didn't know the exact address. Under Jeol's guidance, Do-won was able to find the children. Before leaving, Do-won once again advised his sister to try to be more normal. He didn't want to delve into whether his sister was helping others solve noise problems. Perhaps to others, her actions were simply self-inflicted trouble and added worries. Jeol spent all day worrying about others' matters. Why couldn't she spend a little more time caring for herself? This way, they, as younger brothers, could worry less. Jeol had long been accustomed to such accusations. No matter how the outside world commented, she just wanted to do things according to her own wishes. When Jeol returned to the apartment and saw the words "Move Out" sprayed in bright red paint at the door, her heart nearly stopped. The inside was also turned upside down. She stayed alert and searched the house, finally finding a young girl sleeping on the bed. The girl was named Sinbai, who had just graduated from college and returned home. She mistakenly thought that Jeol, the new tenant, had taken the package she sent home that got lost, which is why she sneaked in to search. After the misunderstanding was cleared up, Sinbai neatly tidied the room, but she insisted that she didn't spray the words outside. Seeing Sinbai's sincere attitude, Jeol called the security guard to request the corridor surveillance footage, only to be told that the camera had been broken for a long time. The apartment had long been in arrears with the property fees and had no money for repairs, and the security guard himself was facing imminent unemployment. Looking at the glaring "move out" words, Jeol's questions grew heavier. Who was secretly causing trouble in this building? After sending off the security guard, a puzzled Jeol walked to the wizard's door and happened to run into him taking out the trash. At that moment, the huge, dull noise started again. Only then did Jeowol believe that the wizard was not related to the noise. The wizard provided a clue. He pulled out a list and pointed out that there were 4 residents who had never asked him for a protective talisman. As a well-known local wizard, he found it strange that neighbors would not seek protection in such a harsh living environment. Jeowol immediately took the list of the 4 residents and checked it one by one with Jiwon. In the end, their attention focused on the 7th floor resident, Dong-oh. Jiwon mentioned that the day Dong-oh moved in was when the residents were arguing fiercely about the demolition. The next day, the noise started in the building. Strangely, this single man would throw away garbage bags filled with women's products every week. Many signs indicated that Dong-oh was suspicious. But when Jeowol met Dong-oh, she overturned her previous suspicions. The two had met once at the police station, where Dong-oh was the resident who reported the noise issue. He was a sleep aid streamer, and those cosmetics were actually tools for creating ASMR sound effects. Dong-oh told Jeowol that for the past 3 months, he had been measuring the decibel levels on each floor and found that the values from the 2nd to the 7th floors were abnormally high. But the noisemaker clearly had a strong counter-surveillance awareness, deliberately creating sounds of varying intensity to interfere with location tracking. As soon as he finished speaking, Jeowol suddenly had a flash of inspiration. She arranged for Ji-won and 4 others, along with herself, to gather at 4 o'clock that morning, with each person responsible for 1 floor, using a noise detection app on their phones to record the decibel levels in front of each door, and then compile the data for analysis and comparison. At that time, the highest value would indicate the biggest suspect. Jeowol also specifically asked the security guard to turn off the corridor lights for the entire building at 4 o'clock in the morning. After hearing this, the security guard couldn't help but ask, what if the criminal is among the team? What if he deliberately records false data to confuse everyone? Jeowol thought this could be solved easily. If the real culprit is mixed in with the team, the noise that night would surely disappear, narrowing the suspicion directly to Ji-won and the other 4, right? After advising the security guard, Jeowol decided to go back and rest well to prepare for the night's operation. However, when she turned around, she found her niece had come over without her noticing. Myeon Jae-ong, concerned about her aunt investigating the noise, specially came to cheer her on. With her niece's support, Jeowol felt greatly encouraged. She was just worried that her brother wouldn't be able to find Myeon Jae-ong, so she called Do-won to inform him that Myeon Jae-ong would be staying with her that night. After listening to Jeowol's account, Do-won sighed deeply, secretly annoyed that this kind of thing had happened again. Then, without waiting for Jeowol to respond, he hung up the phone. At 4 in the morning, as the security guard pulled down the main switch, the entire apartment plunged into darkness, and Jeowol led the team to begin their operation. However, just as she was diligently recording, the wizard upstairs suddenly let out a scream. He had injured his ankle from an accidentally dropped jar of bean paste. Worse still, all the recorded data was stained with sauce, and the entire team, except for Jeowol, was in disarray. Ji-won couldn't download the app due to a phone system update. Dong-oh's handwriting was too messy to read, and Sinbai overslept and missed the recording. Only Jae-suk, who was responsible for the 2nd floor, made a discovery. That floor not only had a decibel level reaching 3 digits, but while he was recording, Widow Yang from room 204 suddenly opened the door and came out, causing the noise to stop. At that time, Widow Yang was the only one home on the entire 2nd floor. At this moment, all clues seemed to point to Widow Yang. Ji-won chose to call the police on the spot. Jeowol ran to the security room to inform the guard that they could turn on the lights, only to find it empty. She had no time to think and rushed back to the 2nd floor. When the police arrived and searched for evidence at Widow Yang's home, they found a severely worn floor under the foam mat. It was inferred that this was caused by Widow Yang knocking on the floor every day at home. The police immediately took her away for a detailed statement investigation. Watching Widow Yang being taken away, Jeowol let out a long sigh. Despite facing her brother's obstruction and the security guard's skepticism, she ultimately succeeded in catching the murderer, seemingly allowing everyone to sleep soundly from now on. For Jeowol, since misfortune could befall anyone, it could one day be her turn too. So, compared to being a normal person who watches coldly from the sidelines, she is more willing to be the one who attracts attention but is eager to help others. As long as it makes everyone's lives a little better, it's worth it. Just after solving the noise issue, Jeowol was busy again. Although she never takes the elevator herself, considering the inconvenience for other residents going up and down, she immediately contacted maintenance to have it checked. After the elevator was repaired, Jeowol found that the homeless man from room 202 had returned. But as soon as he saw her, he turned and ran away. She sensed something was wrong and, after some twists and turns, managed to catch up with the homeless man. The first thing he said when stopped left Ji-wol stunned. The homeless man claimed that Widow Yang from room 204 was definitely not the real culprit, because last night he was awakened by the noise, and when he looked for the source, he found that someone was hitting the wall in the living room of room 202 with a baseball bat. It was just too dark to see what the person looked like. Ji-wol immediately returned to room 202 and indeed found a baseball bat in the living room. She struck the wall with the bat and found that the sound produced was exactly the same as the noise she heard last night. She immediately realized the seriousness of the situation. It was certain that there was a mole in the team, and last night's plan had been leaked. Otherwise, the murderer wouldn't have acted out of character, deliberately sneaking into room 202 to create a disturbance to divert attention. On the other side, Do-won had been feeling uneasy since receiving a call from his sister. He knew Se-on was helping his sister investigate the noise, so he specifically sought out Se-on to advise him not to indulge his sister's nonsense anymore. Se-on, however, disagreed. He believed that his sister had done everyone a great service this time, successfully capturing the real culprit last night. Do-won showed a surprised expression. Se-on bluntly stated that he didn't need to hide it. He clearly cared about his sister just as much, even sharing a phone account with her to check her location through the cloud album at any time. So why always hide this concern behind disdain and contempt? After being called out by his younger brother, Do-won felt a bit frustrated for a moment. But after some struggle, he still bought some fruit, preparing to visit his sister. However, just as Do-won reached the bottom of the apartment building, he witnessed his sister being splashed with a bucket of cold water by Widow Yang from room 204. It turned out that Widow Yang's husband died of lung cancer, and since then she has been extremely sensitive to the smell of smoke. Coincidentally, the wizard had smoked while investigating last night, and Widow Yang opened the door to check because she smelled the smoke. The wear marks on her floor were actually caused by a pet dog she used to have. Widow Yang now hates Joel to the core, believing that not only did she fail to find the real culprit, but she also falsely accused her, causing her to be taken away by the police in front of so many neighbors, losing all face. Joel looked at the agitated Widow Yang, feeling guilty and unable to speak. Do-won, who witnessed the whole process, also believed that rather than causing trouble here, it would be better for his sister to go home and take care of the children. Joel deliberately ignored his words and instead mentioned Do-won, which was just right, as it allowed her to bring her niece Myung-jae home together. The child was currently napping in the room. She emphasized that as long as the real culprit had not appeared, she would not leave for a day. Upon hearing this, Do-won, who had already opened the car door and was ready to leave, instantly froze. He turned around, and the tears he had suppressed for so long burst forth, since he had decided to bring Myung-jae home. But how could he bring back a child who had long since passed away? The death of Myung-jae was something his sister could not reverse, and she could not change this world either. So, please do not dwell on the obsession any longer. Back then, Jiawol's nephew was still in swaddling clothes, while her niece Myung-jae was already of kindergarten age. One day, Jiawol fell into a deep sleep from the exhaustion of taking care of her nephew and accidentally missed the time to pick Myung-jae up from school. This was not a big deal, as kindergartens usually have school buses for pickup and drop-off. However, that day, Myung-jae fell asleep on the school bus, and the teacher and driver, due to negligence, did not check the vehicle carefully, locking her inside. Thus, the tragedy occurred. When Myung-jae woke up, the scorching midday sun was baking the enclosed vehicle, and the tightly closed windows cut off all air. Trapped in the car, Myung-jae ultimately lost her life due to heat stroke and lack of oxygen. From then on, Jiawol fell into an endless abyss of self-blame. She constantly questioned herself. Why did she oversleep that day? Why couldn't she go pick up the child that day? If she had gone to pick Myung-jae up from school herself, she would not have boarded that deadly school bus. Jiawol could not imagine how desperate Myung-jae must have felt when she woke up to find herself trapped in an enclosed space, with no way to call for help. This guilt drove her to run around, calling for legislation to mandate the installation of child sleep monitoring alarm systems on school buses. It was also from that day on that Jiawol's mental state began to deteriorate. She started to fear all enclosed spaces, was afraid to ride in cars, afraid to take elevators, and even insisted on wearing sandals in winter. The image of Myung-jae often flashed in her mind, as if the child had never left. Jiawol was not unaware that it was her own hallucination, but she could not let go of her longing for Myung-jae, unable to forget her niece's apple-like rosy smile and the way she called her aunt. However, as time passed, Do-won, as a father, gradually learned to let go, while she, as an aunt, still indulged in the past sorrow, seeming out of place. Jeol had always acted on a sense of justice, and although she faced countless criticisms, she had never wavered, stemming from her fear of the tragedy of Myeonjeon repeating itself. But this time, she wronged Widow Yang. Recalling her brother's words, she herself cannot change this world, Jeol couldn't help but start to doubt. Does everything she does really have meaning? On the other side, Do-won once again found his brother Seon to share his inner frustrations. Over the years, he has been trying to help his sister step out of the shadow of her daughter's passing. But Jeol's behavior has become increasingly extreme, doing things her own way without considering others' feelings, and now even wrongfully accusing good people. Do-won feels powerless and doesn't know what to do. After listening, Seon couldn't help but sigh that Do-won always jumps to conclusions, assuming that everything his sister does is problematic. With such a mindset, how can he truly help her? Seon expressed that he often takes the initiative to talk to Jeol about Myeonjeong, asking, "What is Myeonjeong doing now?" as if it were a normal daily sharing rather than a painful topic to avoid. Therefore, he hopes Do-won can interact with his sister with an ordinary mindset and better understand her behavior. Things will eventually turn around. Although Jeol targeted the wrong person, the noisemaker was clearly intimidated by her actions and was silent all night last night. But what good is that? The real culprit has not been caught. Frustrated, Jeol packed her bags and decided to follow her brother's advice to move back home and continue taking care of her nephew. However, before leaving, she encountered the water delivery worker from the second floor who was on the night shift. Upon learning that Jeol was leaving, the water delivery worker repeatedly expressed regret, saying her efforts were certainly not in vain. For the first time in half a year, he had slept so soundly, and everyone in the apartment was very grateful to her. Facing the water delivery worker's sincere gaze, Jeol, who had been feeling down, felt a renewed strength within her. She reviewed the entire investigation process and suddenly noticed significant doubts about the security guard. That night, when she asked the guard to turn the corridor lights back on, she found the security room empty, and the guard was nowhere to be found. Even more bizarre was that yesterday, when she found the guard with a baseball bat and claimed to have discovered new clues, she had not revealed the location of the bat, yet the guard blurted out room 202, asking her how she could find the bat inside. In hindsight, it is very likely that the guard, after turning off the power, sneaked into room 202 to create the noise. However, aside from that night, the guard usually sleeps with his ears plugged. The water delivery worker knows this best because every time the noise occurs, it coincides with his night shift. He often uses it as an alarm clock, and every time he leaves, he sees the guard dozing off in the security room. So, the guard is not the culprit they are looking for. Jeol speculates that he might have been bribed by the real culprit to deliberately knock on the wall that night, so that stopping the noise suddenly wouldn't raise his suspicions. And since that night's investigation was supposed to be a secret operation, the real murderer must be lurking among the 5 members of the team. Later, Jeol learned that the guard was hired to the community only after the noise issue arose. However, the owners here even refused to pay the property fees, and one can imagine how little the security guard can earn. The water delivery man reassured her not to worry, as he had seen the security guard operating an excavator at the demolition site during his deliveries, indicating he had another job. However, adhering to the principle of avoiding unnecessary trouble, the water delivery man had never mentioned this to anyone. Upon hearing this, Jeol suddenly realized an apartment caught in a demolition dispute, a security guard's salary that barely covers expenses. The answer was clear. The security guard was not an ordinary guard. His true identity was a member of the demolition team, lurking here to force the residents to move out. But who was the one being threatened by the security guard every night, actually causing the noise? After some investigation, Jeol focused her attention on Jang-suk, one of the 5 team members. She approached Jang-suk's door, only to find him beaten and bruised. Faced with Jeol's questioning, Jang-suk finally confessed everything. Due to debts, he had to create noise every night to repay them. If he didn't follow the security guard's orders, he would get beaten. Just like last night when he didn't dare to act, today he ended up like this. Jang-suk now only hoped that Jeol would let it go and not get involved in this matter, giving him a way out. Meanwhile, an elevator accident suddenly occurred in the apartment. A homeless man who was in the elevator was severely injured and sent to the hospital for treatment. After checking the severed cable, Jeol understood that this was done by the security guard as revenge against the homeless man. She then went to the security room and confronted the guard in the basement. The guard initially showed his security badge, claiming he didn't understand what she was saying. But as Jeol pressed him further, the guard finally revealed his true colors and knocked her down when she was off guard. However, Jeol revealed a meaningful smile. It turned out that an hour earlier, when she walked out of the elevator, she had encountered Jang-suk, who approached her voluntarily. Jang-suk knew Jeol was a good person and didn't want her to get involved in this mess, and told her that the security guard actually had ties to the underworld. He had an agreement with the Reconstruction Association and the construction company to share huge profits once the demolition was completed. The origin of the noise was initially due to his inability to repay debts, resulting in nightly beatings. As more residents complained and moved out, the Reconstruction Association saw this as a good method and arranged for the security guard to monitor Jang-suk to continue creating noise. The truth was now clear, and a plan formed in Jeol's mind. She decided to personally distract the security guard, allowing Jang-suk and the other 4 team members to infiltrate the security room to look for tax records of bribery between the security guard and association personnel, in order to expose their wrongdoing to the police. Upon hearing this, the security guard's heart sank. He immediately contacted his accomplices and rushed to the security room to stop the 5 from acting. Meanwhile, Do-won saw the latest video uploaded by his sister through a real-time synced cloud album. He realized that Jeol was in danger and immediately set off to the apartment, just in time to encounter the 5-member team who were at a loss in front of the security room's safe. They neither knew the password nor where the key was. Do-won remembered the keyring that the security guard carried, but upon looking around, he found that his sister was not inside. Fortunately, the security guard had already gone to stop everyone from searching for evidence. Do-won arrived in the basement and successfully untied the ropes around his sister. Looking at the blood on her face, he felt a surge of pain in his heart. Do-won understood that it was his immaturity in the past that made him think his sister was meddling and not giving her enough care, which led her to immerse herself in the illusion of being accompanied by Min-jae. On the other side, while the security guard and the 5-member team were fighting over the keys, they accidentally dropped them into the sewer. At this point, no one could open the safe, and the security guard couldn't help but show a smug expression. However, he hadn't been happy for long when he noticed that Jeol had appeared in the security room, holding the folder containing the evidence. It turned out that Jeol remembered the birth date he had seen on the security badge and tried to input it into the password field, and surprisingly, it successfully opened the safe. When the folder was snatched from Jeol's hands by the security guard's subordinate, the guard was about to destroy it, but found that the documents inside had already been replaced with promotional flyers. Meanwhile, Jeol had taken advantage of their unpreparedness and sprinted to the police station with the real evidence. Seeing the security guard standing there in shock, Do-won couldn't help but step forward to mock him, asking if he had messed with his sister. The most terrifying people in this world are not politicians or entrepreneurs, but those who, even with no profit to gain, still try to make the world a slightly better place.